The year was 1847, and the American frontier was as beautiful as it was merciless. For those brave enough to seek a new life in the Western Territories, the journey often revealed the true nature of those they traveled with. When young Hannah Mitchell found herself abandoned in the wilderness, her fate seemed sealed. 8 months pregnant and injured, she prepared to meet her end under the vast sky of the unsettled lands. But destiny had other plans when a Shawnee hunter named Takoda discovered her near death at the base of a ravine. What followed was a story of survival, unlikely friendship, and a new beginning that would challenge everything both of them believed about the world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Spring had arrived late that year, but the promise of new beginnings finally convinced Thomas Mitchell that it was time to join the westward expansion. At 32, he had grown weary of his failing blacksmith business in Springfield, Illinois. His wife Hannah, 10 years his junior, and expecting their first child, had initially resisted the idea of traveling while with child. But Thomas had painted such a vivid picture of their future homestead in Oregon Territory. Lush valleys, abundant game, rich soil for farming, that she eventually succumbed to his enthusiasm. "Think of it, Hannah," Thomas would say, his eyes alight with ambition. "Our child will be born in a place where they can truly be free, where we can build something that belongs only to us." Hannah, with her honey-blonde hair often tied back in a practical braid and eyes the color of summer sage, had always been practical where her husband was impulsive. Yet she loved him for his dreams and the way he spoke of the future with such certainty. So she packed their belongings, sold what little they couldn't take, and joined the Mitchell-Reed wagon train with 23 other families, all bound for Oregon. The train was led by Silas Reed, Thomas's second cousin, a man with a reputation for successfully guiding settlers west twice before. Tall and weathered, with a beard streaked with gray despite being only 40, Silas carried himself with the authority of someone who had seen both the wonder and terror of the untamed territories. The journey will take approximately 5 months. Silas had told the assembled families on that crisp April morning as they prepared to depart. "We'll reach Oregon before the first snow, God willing. But make no mistake, this journey will test every one of you. The weak of spirit need not apply." His eyes had lingered on Hannah and her swollen belly, and she had straightened her spine. In defiance, one protective hand resting on her unborn child. The first weeks of the journey had been almost pleasant, the spring weather mild, the terrain of the Great Plains manageable, spirits high with anticipation. Hannah had made friends with Sarah Miller, a young mother of 2 whose husband Daniel was a carpenter with dreams of building a sawmill in Oregon. Sarah's children, Emma and Joshua, aged 6 and 4, had taken to calling Hannah Auntie, which secretly delighted her as she anticipated motherhood. "You'll be a natural mother," Sarah assured her one evening as they sat by the campfire, the wagons circled for the night. "You have the patience for it, unlike me. Sometimes I think Daniel took to the idea of Oregon just to give the children more space to expend their energy." Hannah had laughed, but privately she worried. The baby was due in July, and they wouldn't reach Oregon until September. She would give birth somewhere on the trail, far from proper medical care or the comfort of a real bed. By the time they reached the foothills of the Rocky Mountains in late May, the mood of the wagon train had shifted. Food supplies were running lower than expected, partially due to poor hunting luck and partially because Silas had miscalculated how much they would need. The terrain grew more difficult, slowing their progress. Wagons broke down more frequently on the rocky paths, and tempers frayed under the strain. Thomas, once so attentive to Hannah's needs, grew increasingly distant, spending more time with Silas and the other men, discussing alternate routes and hunting expeditions. Hannah noticed that Thomas often sat with Rebecca Hayes during meals, a widow traveling with her brother's family. With her raven hair and quick laugh, Rebecca was everything Hannah wasn't in her current state. Nimble, helpful, unburdened. "You're imagining things," Sarah insisted when Hannah confided her worries. "Thomas is just concerned about getting us all safely to Oregon. Men think they need to solve every problem themselves." But Hannah saw the way Thomas's eyes followed Rebecca around the camp, how his laughter came more easily in her presence. She tried to dismiss her suspicions as the irrational fears of a pregnant woman, but the seed of doubt had been planted. One evening in early June, as they made camp near a narrow river cutting through a rocky valley, Hannah overheard Thomas speaking with Silas behind their wagon. "She's slowing us down, Silas," Thomas said, his voice low but clear in the still dusk. "Yeah. The baby won't come for another month, and she can barely help with the daily chores anymore. At this rate, we won't reach the Willamette Valley before the mountain passes snow." "What exactly are you suggesting, Thomas?" Silas asked, his tone guarded. There was a pause before Thomas answered. "There's that missionary outpost about 2 days back. We could leave her there until after the baby comes. She could catch up with another train later in the season or next year." Hannah froze, her hand instinctively moving to her belly where the baby kicked vigorously, as if protesting the father's suggestion. "And what would you do?" Silas's voice had an edge to it now. "Continue on without your wife and child?" "I could prepare our homestead," Thomas replied quickly, too quickly. "Make sure everything is ready for when she arrives." "And does Rebecca Hayes factor into this plan of yours?" The silence that followed told Hannah everything she needed to know. She retreated quietly to the campfire, her mind reeling. That night she lay sleepless beside Thomas, listening to his even breathing and wondering how the man she had married, the man who had once held her hands and promised to cherish her all his days, could contemplate abandoning her and their unborn child. The next morning Hannah said nothing of what she had overheard. She went about her chores with mechanical efficiency, avoiding Thomas's gaze. When Sarah asked if she was feeling well, Hannah merely blamed her pallor on a restless night. For 3 days, Hannah observed Thomas and Rebecca together, noting their furtive glances and brief touches when they thought no one was looking. She saw how Thomas volunteered for the same duties as Rebecca, how they would disappear momentarily behind wagons or into the trees to gather firewood. On the 4th day, as they navigated a particularly treacherous mountain pass, disaster struck. Hannah was riding in their wagon, while Thomas walked alongside to lighten the load for the struggling oxen. The path narrowed, with a steep drop to the left and a rocky wall to the right. The lead wagon hit a boulder, causing a chain reaction, as drivers pulled hard on their reins to avoid collision. Thomas, who had drifted ahead to walk near Rebecca's wagon, rushed back when he heard the commotion, but he was too late. The Mitchell wagon teetered on the edge of the path, the right wheels lifting off the ground as the oxen strained against the weight. "Jump, Hannah!" Thomas shouted, his face pale with fear as he ran toward her. Hannah tried to move, but her swollen body was too slow. The wagon lurched again, and suddenly she was falling, tumbling over the edge of the path. She heard screams, her own and others, as she plummeted down the rocky slope, trying desperately to protect her belly as she fell. The world spun in sickening circles until a jarring impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Pain exploded through her body, and darkness crowded the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was Thomas's face peering over the edge of the cliff, Rebecca Hayes at his side. When Hannah awoke, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ravine where she had landed. She was alone, Painfully, she took stock of her injuries, a gash on her forehead that had bled into her eyes, a left arm that screamed in agony when she tried to move it, lightly broken, and countless bruises and cuts across her body. Miraculously, when she placed her right hand on her belly, she felt a reassuring kick from the baby within. "Hello?" she called out weakly, her voice barely carrying in the vast wilderness. "Thomas? Anyone?" Only the wind answered, whistling through the pine trees that dotted the ravine. With growing horror, Hannah realized the wagon train had continued on without her. Whether Thomas had believed her dead or simply seized the opportunity to be rid of his burdensome wife, the result was the same. She had been abandoned. Night fell, bringing with it a bone-deep chill that made Hannah's teeth chatter. She managed to drag herself to a sheltered spot beneath an outcropping of rock, but without fire or blankets, she knew she wouldn't survive many nights in the mountain. Wilderness, wild animals, exposure, her injuries, or the impending birth of her child, any one of these could claim her life. As she huddled in the darkness, Hannah wept not for herself, but for her unborn child, who might never draw breath in this world. She spoke softly to her belly, making promises she feared she couldn't keep. "I'll find a way," she whispered. "Somehow, I'll keep you safe." Morning came with no relief. Hannah's throat was parched, her injured arm throbbing with each heartbeat. She knew she needed to find water, but every movement sent waves of pain through her body. Still, the thought of her child gave her the strength to stand, leaning heavily against the rock wall. She began to follow the bottom of the ravine, hoping it would lead to water. The going was excruciatingly slow, each step a new lesson in pain. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly, and Hannah's vision began to blur with dehydration and exhaustion. Finally, she heard the blessed sound of running water. A small stream cut through the ravine, about 50 yards ahead. Hannah pushed herself forward, collapsing at the water's edge and drinking deeply from her cupped right hand. For 2 days, Hannah survived on water from the stream and a few wild berries she recognized as safe to eat from her childhood on her father's farm. She tried to climb the ravine walls to find the trail again, but lacked the strength with her injured arm. Each night, she built a small fire with one-handed clumsiness, hoping against hope that someone from the wagon train had realized she might have survived and sent a search party back for her. On the 3rd day, fever set in. Hannah's forehead burned, while her body shivered with chills. The cut on her head had become infected, the skin around it hot and swollen. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling out Thomas's name, sometimes her parents', who had passed years before. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was in this state, delirious with fever, weakened by hunger, and growing closer to giving birth with each passing day, that Takoda found her. Takoda had been tracking a wounded elk for most of the morning, following the blood trail that led him down into the ravine. At 30, he was one of the most respected hunters in his Shawnee band, known for his ability to track game others would lose. He had been hunting alone, as he often preferred, when he spotted the thin column of smoke from Hannah's pitiful fire. Approaching, cautiously, his bow ready, Takoda was unprepared for the sight of the white woman lying half-conscious beside the dying embers. Her swollen belly immediately told him she was with child, and the angry red wound on her forehead explained her delirious state. Hannah's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his approach, fear momentarily cutting through her fever as she saw the Shawnee hunter standing over her. She had heard stories all her life about the savage Indians who roamed the territories, tales of scalping and kidnapping that mothers used to frighten disobedient children. But in her current state, even such a fate seemed preferable to dying, alone in the wilderness. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry. My baby." Dakota understood enough English to comprehend her plea. He had traded with white settlers at outposts and learned their language, though he rarely had reason to use it. He knelt beside her, setting down his bow and reaching for his water skin. "Drink," he said, holding it to her cracked lips. Hannah drank gratefully, studying the man through fever-hazed eyes. His black hair was pulled back from a face marked with a single line of red paint across the cheekbones. His buckskin clothing was adorned with intricate beadwork, and around his neck hung a small leather pouch decorated with porcupine quills. "My name is Hannah," she managed to say after drinking. "Hannah Mitchell." "Takoda," he replied, pointing. To himself, he examined her injuries with careful hands, his face giving away nothing of his thoughts. When he touched her broken arm, Hannah couldn't suppress a cry of pain. Dakota nodded, as if confirming something to himself, then stood. Hannah felt a surge of panic. "Don't leave me," she pleaded. Dakota shook his head and made a gesture indicating he would return. He pantomimed sleep, then pointed at her, conveying that she should rest. Too weak to protest, Hannah closed her eyes, certain that when she opened them again, the Shawnee hunter would be gone, a fever dream dispelled by the harsh light of reality. But Dakota did return, carrying a bundle of herbs and strips of leather. With skilled hands, he fashioned a splint for her broken arm, securing it with the leather strips. He ground some of the herbs into a paste, applying it to the infected wound on her forehead. Others he brewed into a bitter tea, which he encouraged her to drink, despite its unpleasant taste. As darkness fell again, Dakota built a proper fire and roasted strips of venison from the elk he had tracked. The rich smell made Hannah's mouth water, and she realized it had been days since she'd had real food. He fed her small pieces, cautioning her with gestures to eat slowly. That night, for the first time since her fall, Hannah slept deeply, comforted by both the medicine Dakota had given her and the knowledge that she was no longer alone in the wilderness. When she woke the next morning, her fever had broken and her mind was clear. Dakota was already awake, adding wood to the fire and preparing more of the medicinal tea. When he saw that she was awake, he nodded in approval, noting the improved clarity in her eyes. "Thank you," Hannah said. "You saved my life." Dakota's expression remained impassive, but he inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. "My husband," Hannah began, then faltered. How could she explain that she had been abandoned, that the father of her child had chosen to leave her for dead rather than burden himself with her care? "White men go," Dakota said, making a sweeping gesture with his hand to indicate the wagon train's continued journey. It wasn't a question. Hannah nodded, tears welling in her eyes despite her determination not to cry. "They left me behind." Dakota's dark eyes studied her face, and Hannah wondered what he saw there. A weak white woman, abandoned by her own kind. A burden he now felt obligated to care for. "The baby comes soon," he said, pointing to her belly. "Yes," Hannah agreed, placing her good hand protectively over her child. "A few weeks, maybe less now." Dakota considered this information, his face unreadable. Then he made a decision. Rising to his feet, he began to gather their meager camp. Extinguishing the fire and collecting his hunting tools. "We go," he said. "My people's camp, medicine woman there. Help with the baby." Hannah stared at him in disbelief. "You'd take me to your camp, but won't your people be angry?" Dakota shook his head. "Nah, Ka, our medicine woman, she help all who need. White or Shawnee, no matter." With gentle hands, he helped Hannah to her feet, supporting her weight as she swayed unsteadily. The journey would be difficult in her condition, but staying in the ravine would mean certain death for her and her child. Hannah had no choice but to trust this stranger who had shown her more kindness in one day than her husband had in the final months of their marriage. As they began their slow journey toward the Shawnee camp, Hannah felt a curious mixture of fear and hope. She had lost everything she had once valued: her home, her husband, her place in society. Yet somehow, in the vast wilderness where she had expected to die, she had found an unexpected ally. Whether that alliance would be enough to ensure her survival and that of her unborn child remained to be seen. What neither Hannah nor Dakota could know was that their chance meeting in that remote ravine would set in motion events that would change not only their own lives, but the lives of two very different communities on the American frontier. The journey to the Shawnee encampment was arduous. What would have taken Dakota half a day alone stretched into 3 days with Hannah's condition. They traveled at dawn and dusk, resting during the hottest hours when the June sun beat down mercilessly upon the land. Hannah's broken arm, though splintered, throbbed with each step, and her advanced pregnancy made every movement a challenge. Dakota fashioned a walking stick from a sturdy branch to help her balance, and when the terrain grew too difficult, he supported her with a strong arm around her waist. Each night he built a fire and prepared simple meals of game meat and wild plants, always ensuring Hannah ate first. "Why are you helping me?" Hannah asked on the second night as they sat beside the campfire. The question had been weighing on her mind since he first found her. Dakota was silent for so long that Hannah thought perhaps he hadn't understood. Then he spoke, his English measured and deliberate. "Many winters ago, my sister carried child. Heavy, snow come, no food. She tried to reach the next village. His face remained impassive, but his eyes reflected an old pain. No one help. Both die." Hannah placed her good hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her palm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Dakota nodded once. "Great Spirit put you in my path, not the same as my sister, but—" He struggled for the words. "Second chance. On." The third day, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a ridge overlooking a valley nestled between two gentle hills. Below, along the banks of a winding river, stood the Shawnee encampment, 24 conical wigwams arranged in a semicircle, thin columns of smoke rising from cooking fires. Children darted between the structures, women worked at tanning hides or grinding corn, and men returned from hunting expeditions or tended to horses in a nearby meadow. Hannah faltered, sudden fear gripping her chest. "What if they don't want me there?" Dakota considered her with steady eyes. "Some will not," he admitted, "but Naukar will accept, and Dakota's word has weight." As they descended into the valley, their approach was noticed. Children stopped their play to stare, pointing and whispering. Women straightened from their work, expressions guarded. A group of hunters, returning with the day's catch, moved quickly to intercept them, hands resting on knife hilts. The leader of this group was an imposing man, taller than Dakota with shoulders like granite. His face was lined by sun and experience, his eyes sharp as he assessed the strange pair approaching his village. "Makya," Dakota greeted him in Shawnee. What followed was a rapid exchange that Hannah couldn't understand, though she recognized the tension in the conversation. Several times, Makya gestured at her with clear displeasure, his voice rising. Dakota remained calm, his responses measured but firm. Finally, an older woman emerged from one of the larger wigwams and approached. She was small in stature, but carried herself with unmistakable authority. Her silver-streaked black hair was braided and wrapped with strips of dyed leather, and her deer-hide dress was adorned with intricate beadwork. Around her neck hung various pouches and amulets that rattled softly as she walked. "Naukar," Dakota said with evident relief, inclining his head respectfully. The medicine woman surveyed Hannah with keen eyes that missed nothing. The splintered arm, the healing wound on her forehead, the exhaustion in her posture, and the prominent swell of her belly. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and placed her wrinkled hands on Hannah's abdomen, closing her eyes briefly. When she spoke, it was in surprisingly clear English. "The child is strong, but sits wrong." Her dark eyes met Hannah's. "How many moons until birth?" 3 or 4 weeks, Hannah answered, then added uncertainly, "I think." Nokar shook her head. "Sooner, I believe. The fall may have hurried things." She turned to Makya and spoke rapidly in Shawnee. The warrior's face remained stony, but after a final sharp comment, he stepped aside, allowing them to pass. "He says, 'You may stay until the child comes,'" Nokar translated, though Hannah suspected the actual message had been less gracious. "Then you must go." "Thank you," Hannah said, her legs trembling with relief and exhaustion. The prospect of giving birth among strangers in an unfamiliar place was terrifying, but far better than facing it alone in the wilderness. Nokar led them to a small wigwam at the edge of the encampment. "This was for storing winter provisions," she explained. "Now empty until fall. You will stay here." The interior was simple, a fire pit in the center, sleeping mats of woven reeds along one wall, and various hooks for hanging belongings. It was modest, but to Hannah, who had spent nights exposed to the elements, it seemed like luxury. "Rest now," Nokar instructed. "Tomorrow we will prepare for the child." After the medicine woman left, Takoda lingered at the entrance. "I will bring food," he said, then hesitated. "You are safe here. Nokar's word is strong medicine." When he returned with a wooden bowl of stew and a water skin, Hannah was already half asleep on one of the mats, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion of their journey. He set the provisions beside her and quietly withdrew. Hannah awakened the next morning to find a young Shawnee woman sitting cross-legged just inside the wigwam's entrance. She appeared to be no more than 16, with bright, curious eyes and a tentative smile. "I am Kinex," she said in careful English. "Nokar sends me. I help you." Over the next few days, Kinex became Hannah's constant companion and guide to Shawnee life. The girl, Nokar's granddaughter and apprentice in the healing arts, had learned English from traders and missionaries who occasionally visited the tribe. She helped Hannah bathe in a secluded bend of the river, brought her fresh clothing, loose deer-hide dresses adapted to accommodate her pregnancy, and patiently taught her basic Shawnee phrases. Through Kinex, Hannah learned that Takoda occupied a unique position in the tribe. He was respected for his hunting skills and wisdom beyond his years, but also viewed with some suspicion for his interest in the white man's world and language. "He trades at fort sometimes," Kinex explained as she showed Hannah how to weave. "A simple basket, brings back metal tools, cloth. Some elders say he is too curious about white ways." "And what do you think?" Hannah asked, struggling with the weaving technique. Kinex shrugged, her nimble fingers correcting Hannah's work. "I think knowledge is like this basket, better when woven from many different materials." While most of the tribe maintained a cautious distance, Nokar visited daily to check on Hannah's health and the baby's position. She brewed teas of herbs unknown to Hannah, applied poultices to her healing wounds, and taught her exercises to help position the baby correctly for birth. "The child turned some," she announced on the 5th day, her hands expertly probing Hannah's abdomen, "but still not perfect. We keep working." Each evening, Takoda would bring portions of his hunt to Hannah's wigwam, though he rarely stayed long. He seemed uncomfortable with the growing curiosity his attention to the white woman was generating among his people. Still, Hannah found herself watching for his arrival, grateful for the quiet strength of his presence in this strange new world. The 7th day, as Hannah sat outside her wigwam enjoying the sunset, Makya approached with 2 other warriors. Their expressions were grim, and Hannah felt a flutter of fear in her chest. "White men come," Makya stated flatly. Soldiers at North River Bend looking for something. His eyes narrowed. Or someone. Hannah's heart raced. Could Thomas have sent a search party after all? Or perhaps Sarah had convinced her husband Daniel to look for Hannah when they realized she might have survived the fall. For a moment, hope surged through her. Then she remembered the reality of her situation. Alone, pregnant, living among a Shawnee tribe. If soldiers found her here, they might assume she had been taken captive. The consequences for the tribe could be disastrous. I should go to them, she said, struggling to rise. Explain that you helped me, that I'm here willingly. No. Dakota's voice came from behind her. He had approached silently, overhearing the conversation. White soldiers see white woman with child among Shawnee. They do not listen to explanations. They attack first. Then what should we do? Hannah asked, looking from Dakota to Makya. Makya's expression was severe. You are the danger you bring to our people. You should never have come. This helps nothing, brother, Dakota replied in English for Hannah's benefit. Turning to her, he explained, Scouts watch soldiers. They make camp for the night. Tomorrow they continue north, away from our village. If they change direction, we have a plan. That night, sleep eluded Hannah. She lay on her sleeping mat, her hand resting on her active child, thinking of the soldiers camped somewhere in the darkness beyond the valley. Were they truly looking for her? Would Thomas actually have sent help after initially abandoning her? The possibility seemed remote, yet who else would be searching these remote hills? Just before dawn, Hannah was awakened by the first contraction. It gripped her abdomen like an iron band, stealing her breath. When it passed, she lay still, counting the minutes until the next one came. 15 minutes later, another wave of pain confirmed her suspicion. The baby was coming, weeks earlier than expected. Kinex! She called out, knowing the girl often slept in a smaller wigwam nearby. Kinex, please! The young woman appeared moments later, took one look at Hannah's face, and ran to fetch her grandmother. Naukau arrived quickly, her expression calm as she assessed the situation. The child chooses a complicated time, she remarked dryly as she examined Hannah. Still early stages. First babies often take their time. As the morning progressed, Hannah's labor intensified. Naukau and Kinex moved with quiet efficiency, preparing herbal remedies for the pain, heating water, and arranging clean hides for the delivery. Outside, tension gripped the camp as scouts continued to monitor the soldiers' movements. Dakota appeared briefly at midday, his face drawn with worry. Soldiers break camp, he informed them. They come this way now. Naukau's eyes met his over Hannah's laboring form. How long? 2 hours, maybe 3. The medicine woman nodded once. The child will come before then, after we hide them both. Hide? Hannah gasped between contractions. Where? Cave system, Dakota explained. Beyond the western ridge. Our people use it in times of danger. As the afternoon wore on, Hannah's labor progressed faster than Naukau had predicted. The contractions came closer together, each one more powerful than the last. Hannah bit down on a strip of leather to keep from crying out, knowing that somewhere beyond the village, soldiers were approaching. Soldiers who might bring either rescue or destruction. Now, Naukau finally instructed, as the sun began its descent toward the western hills, with the next pain push with all strength. Hannah had never known pain like this. It consumed her world, narrowed her vision to a tunnel of fire and pressure. She pushed as directed, again and again, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. And then, as dusk settled, over the Shawnee camp, a new cry pierced the air. The first breath of Hannah's daughter, born beneath an alien sky, far from the life Hannah had once imagined. A girl, Naukau announced, cleaning the infant with practiced hands before placing her on Hannah's chest. Strong lungs. Good sign. Hannah gazed down at the tiny, perfect face of her daughter, the delicate curve of her eyebrows, the rosebud mouth, the wisps of dark hair plastered to her head. In that moment, the journey, the betrayal, the fear, all of it receded. This child was worth everything she had endured. Elizabeth, Hannah whispered, remembering her beloved grandmother's name, Elizabeth Mitchell. Her moment of peace was shattered by Dakota's urgent arrival. "Soldiers," he said, his breathing ragged from running, "less than an hour away. We must move now." Naukar nodded grimly. "The mother needs rest. The birth was fast, but there is no time," Dakota interrupted. "Makia prepares the warriors. He says, if the white woman is found here, blood will flow." Hannah struggled to sit up, clutching her newborn daughter. "I won't let that happen," she insisted, though her body trembled with exhaustion. "Help me stand." What followed was a blur of pain and determination. Kinex wrapped the newborn securely against Hannah's chest. Dakota supported Hannah as she stumbled from the wigwam, her body protesting each movement so soon after giving birth. A small group had assembled, Naukar, Kinex, and 2 young warriors who would accompany them to the cave. As they prepared to leave, Makia approached, his face like thunder. He spoke rapidly to Dakota in Shawnee, gesturing angrily toward Hannah. "And the baby, what is he saying?" Hannah asked weakly. Dakota's jaw tightened. "He says you bring death to our people, that your husband leads soldiers here for revenge." "My husband?" Hannah stared in disbelief. "Thomas is with the soldiers?" After a brief exchange with Makia, Dakota nodded. Scout recognized him. Rides, with blue-coat soldiers, 20 men with rifles. Hannah felt as though the ground had fallen away beneath her feet. Thomas hadn't come to rescue her. He had come to silence her. If she was found alive, she could reveal his betrayal, his abandonment of his pregnant wife. But why bring soldiers? Unless... "He's telling them I was captured," she realized aloud, clutching Elizabeth tighter, "that I was taken by Shawnee warriors. He's using me to justify an attack on your people." Naukar's dark eyes flashed with understanding. "Many white men seek reasons to clear Indians from good hunting lands. Your husband may have found powerful friends who want our territory." The revelation struck Hannah like a physical blow. Thomas had not only abandoned her to die, but was now using her supposed capture as pretext for violence against the very people who had saved her life. The depth of his betrayal was unfathomable. "We must go," Dakota urged, eyeing the darkening sky. Now, with her newborn daughter secured against her chest and supported by Dakota's strong arm, Hannah began the painful journey toward the caves beyond the western ridge. Each step was agony, her body still raw from childbirth, but she pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that lives depended on her reaching safety. Behind them, the Shawnee camp prepared for possible conflict, women and children gathering, essential provisions, men checking weapons, scouts reporting on the soldiers' approach. Makia had made it clear that he would not initiate violence, but neither would he allow his people to be slaughtered. The path to the caves wound upward through increasingly rocky terrain. Hannah stumbled frequently, once falling to her knees. With a cry of pain that startled little Elizabeth into wailing, "Shh, little one," she soothed, even as tears of exhaustion tracked down her own cheeks. "We must be quiet now." Dakota lifted Hannah into his arms, ignoring her weak protests. "No time," he said simply, and began to carry both mother and child up the steep path. Though strong, he was not a large man, and the burden was considerable. Still, he moved with determined efficiency, his breathing controlled and steady. They had nearly reached the ridge when they heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching the Shawnee camp below. The night had fully fallen now, and in the moonlight they could see the torches of the soldiers as they surrounded the village. "Faster!" Naukar urged from behind them. "They must not hear the child." But Elizabeth perhaps sensing her mother's. Fear began to cry again, a high, thin wail that seemed to carry in the still night air. Hannah tried desperately to soothe her, offering her breast, rocking her gently, but the infant was inconsolable. Takoda set Hannah down at the top of the ridge, his expression grave. "Stay here," he instructed. "I go back. Draw attention away from your path." "No!" Hannah clutched at his arm. "They'll kill you." "If soldiers find a cave, they kill all," he countered. "I lead them in the wrong direction." Before she could protest further, he spoke rapidly to Narkor in Shawnee. The medicine woman nodded solemnly, then took Hannah's arm to guide her forward. "Come," Narkor said firmly. "Takoda knows what he does." As they disappeared into the cover of the trees that dotted the ridge, Hannah looked back one last time. Takoda stood silhouetted against the night sky, watching them go. Then he turned and began to descend toward the encampment, one man walking deliberately into danger to protect a woman and child who weren't his own. In that moment, with her daughter in her arms and her heart in her throat, Hannah Mitchell realized that she had lost one life, but might have found another if they survived the night that lay ahead. The caves loomed before them now, dark mouths in the mountainside that promised either shelter or entombment. As Narkor led her into the shadowy depths, Hannah whispered a prayer, not to the god of her childhood, but to whatever spirits might be listening in this wild land. "Keep him safe," she murmured, thinking of Takoda even as she followed Narkor deeper into the darkness, "and show me the way forward from here." Behind them, the first shots rang out in the valley below. Deep within the cave system, Hannah couldn't distinguish between the pounding of her heart and the distant echoes of gunfire. The natural caverns twisted in labyrinthine patterns there, walls cool and slick with moisture, the air heavy with the scent of earth and stone. Narkor led the small group with unwavering confidence, navigating the darkness with only a small torch of pine resin that cast dancing shadows across the ancient rock formations. Elizabeth had finally settled against Hannah's chest, lulled by exhaustion into a fitful sleep. Each time the newborn stirred, Hannah held her breath, terrified that a cry might echo through the caves and reveal their location. Her body ached fiercely from childbirth and the strenuous escape, but fear for her daughter and for Takoda drove her forward when her strength threatened to fail. "How deep do these caves go?" Hannah whispered to Kinex, who walked beside her, supporting her when she stumbled. "Many passages," the girl replied quietly. "Some lead to other valley, some to nowhere. Shawnee knows secret ways." Hours passed in tense silence as they moved deeper into the mountain. Occasionally, they would stop to rest, Narkor checking on Hannah's condition with practiced hands and concerned eyes. The old woman had brought herbs and clean cloths and tended to Hannah with brisk efficiency during these breaks. "You bleed still," she observed during one such examination, her face grave in the torch's flickering light. "Too much walking too. Soon after birth, I had no choice," Hannah replied, wincing as Narkor applied a poultice of pungent herbs to stem the bleeding. "No," the medicine woman agreed, "but the body does not care about the reasons, only knows it is wounded." Dawn was approaching, according to Narkor's innate sense of time, when they reached a larger chamber deep within the caves. Here, Shawnee had already gathered. Elderly men and women, mothers with small children, a few injured warriors. They regarded Hannah with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. An older man with a deeply lined face approached Narkor, speaking rapidly in Shawnee. His gestures were animated, his tone urgent. "Makwa asks about the fighting," Kinex translated for Hannah. "He is the tribe's storyteller, keeps our history. His grandson went with warriors." Narkor's response was measured, her hands moving in explanatory gestures. Finally, she turned to Hannah. "No word yet from the village," she explained. We wait. Rest now. Exhaustion finally claimed Hannah, and she drifted into fitful sleep in a corner of the cavern, Elizabeth secured in her arms. Her dreams were chaotic. Visions of Thomas leading soldiers with burning torches, of Takoda falling beneath a cavalry charge, of her baby crying as wagon wheels rolled over the edge of a cliff. She awakened with a start to find Kinnex beside her, offering a wooden cup of water and a strip of dried venison. "You must eat," the girl insisted. "For milk, for baby." Hannah accepted the provisions gratefully, suddenly aware of her parched throat and gnawing hunger. As she ate, she noticed that the atmosphere in the cave had changed. More people had arrived during her sleep, and conversations hummed throughout the chamber, punctuated by occasional laughter or calls of greeting. "What's happening?" she asked Kinnex. The girl's face brightened. "Good news! Soldiers gone, no one was killed." Relief flooded through Hannah, making her lightheaded. "And Takoda, he comes soon," Kinnex assured her. "He speaks with the elders." Now, at the cave entrance, Hannah struggled to her feet, ignoring the protests of her battered body. "I need to see him, to thank him." Kinnex hesitated, then nodded. "I will take you, but slowly. Naukor will be angry if you tear healing wounds." They made their way through the cavern, Hannah leaning heavily on Kinnex for support, Elizabeth still sleeping peacefully against her chest. At the far end, a narrow passage sloped upward toward daylight. Voices echoed from this direction, male voices engaged in serious discussion. As they approached, Hannah recognized Takoda's measured tones among them. He appeared unharmed, though exhaustion lined his face. Beside him stood Makia, his expression thunderous as he gestured emphatically. 3 older men, tribal elders, Hannah presumed, listened with grave attention. Takoda noticed Hannah first, his eyes meeting hers across the passage. Something flickered in his gaze, relief, perhaps, or concern, before he turned back to the elders and spoke a few final words. The group dispersed, Makia brushing past Hannah without acknowledgement, his disapproval radiating like heat. "You should be resting," Takoda said as he approached, his eyes taking in her pallor and unsteady stance. "I heard the soldiers were gone," Hannah replied. "No one was hurt." Takoda's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. 2 warriors wounded, none killed. Soldiers searched the village, found nothing suspicious, then continued north. "And Thomas, my husband?" He led them, claimed Shawnee raiders took his pregnant wife from the wagon train. Takoda's voice was carefully neutral. "Convenient story. Explains why he continued journey without you." The calculated nature of Thomas's betrayal struck Hannah anew. He had not only abandoned her, but had crafted a narrative that absolved him of guilt, while potentially justifying violence against innocent people. The man she had married, the father of the child in her arms, was a stranger to her now. "What happens now?" she asked, shifting Elizabeth gently as the baby began to stir. Takoda glanced toward the elders, who had gathered with Naukar some distance away. "Council decides. Some say you must leave once you are strong enough. Too dangerous to keep white woman and child. And you? What do you say?" His eyes, dark and unreadable, studied her face. "I say waiting for strength may take too long. Husband may return with more soldiers, more determined search." Hannah felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "You want me to leave? Too?" "No." The single word hung between them, laden with meaning, Takoda seemed reluctant to elaborate on. Finally, he continued, "I say we all leave. This territory becomes unsafe. My mother's people have camp 3 days' journey west, near the trading post where some white settlers live peacefully with tribes." Hope sparked in Hannah's chest. A place where Elizabeth and I might find acceptance? Perhaps. Not an easy life, but a possible life. He hesitated. "If you choose." Before Hannah could respond, Elizabeth began to cry in earnest, her tiny face contorting with hunger. As Hannah shifted to nurse her, Takoda stepped back, his expression shuddering. "You rest, grow strong," he said. "Council makes decision by sundown." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and speculation. Hannah nursed Elizabeth, dozed fitfully, and listened to the murmured conversations around her, straining to understand fragments of Shawnee that Kinex had taught her. The girl brought reports from the council discussions, though she was careful not to promise outcomes. "Makia speaks against Takoda's plan," she informed Hannah at one point. "Says, white woman brings bad spirits to tribe, and the others?" Hannah asked, fear constricting her throat. Kinex shrugged. "Some agree with Takoda, some with Makia. Nauka's voice carries weight. She supports you." By late afternoon, a decision had been reached. Naukau approached Hannah's resting place, her aged face solemn. "Council has spoken," she announced. "Tribe divides. Some follow Makia to eastern hunting grounds. Some follow Takoda to western camp." Her eyes, sharp despite her years, assessed Hannah. "You may go with Takoda's group if you wish, or we will find a place for you at White Settlement." The choice seemed clear to Hannah, yet she hesitated. Why would Takoda risk division in his tribe for me, for us? She glanced down at Elizabeth, now sleeping soundly after nursing. Norko's mouth curved in a slight smile. "Takoda sees the world changing, believes Shawnee must find a new way to live or perish. Perhaps you are part of that new way." She paused. "Or perhaps his heart speaks louder than his head. It happens, even to wise hunters." Before Hannah could process this implication, Naukar continued, "We leave at first light. Rest now. Journey will test your strength." The exodus began before dawn, as the first pale light seeped into the sky. Takoda's group comprised nearly half the tribe, families with young children, several elders including Naukar and Makwa, and warriors who respected Takoda's vision of a different future. Makia's followers had already departed for the eastern territories, the division accomplished with minimal conflict but palpable tension. Hannah traveled in a travois, a simple sledge of wooden poles, pulled by Takoda's sturdy pinto horse. Elizabeth lay beside her, swaddled in soft rabbit skins gifted by the tribal women. Though the travois movement was jarring, it allowed Hannah's body the rest it desperately needed to heal. Takoda led the procession, setting a pace that balanced urgency with consideration for the young and elderly among them. He rarely spoke directly to Hannah during the first day's journey, though his eyes frequently checked on her condition from a distance. That evening, as the tribe established camp in a sheltered valley, Kinex helped Hannah from the travois and guided her to a small fire where Naukar waited with herbal teas and fresh bandages. "The bleeding slows," the medicine woman noted with approval after examining Hannah. "Good sign, but still weak. I'll regain my strength," Hannah promised, sipping the bitter tea Naukar pressed upon her. "I won't slow the tribe's progress." "Tribe does not abandon its own," Naukar replied matter-of-factly. "You are with us now." The simple statement, "You are with us now," resonated through Hannah as she settled beside the fire, Elizabeth nursing contentedly in her arms. She had lost everything familiar, her husband, her planned future in Oregon, her place in white society. Yet somehow in the ashes of that life, something new had begun to take root. The journey continued for 3 days, following obscure trails through increasingly rugged terrain. Hannah grew stronger each day, eventually able to walk short distances during rest periods. Elizabeth thrived, her tiny features growing more defined, her eyes, blue like Hannah's, beginning to focus on the world around her. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Takoda dropped back from his position at the head of the group to walk beside Hannah's travois. "We reach my mother's people by nightfall," he informed her. "You should know what to expect." He explained that his mother had been a northern Shawnee woman who had married into his father's southern band. She had died when Dakota was young, but her brother, his uncle Keme, was a respected leader among the northern band. The camp they approached was smaller than their previous settlement, but situated advantageously near both hunting grounds, and a trading post established by a former fur trapper named Jackson Caldwell. Caldwell married Keem's daughter, Dakota explained, lives with tribe but maintains connections with white settlers. Some families trade regularly, except tribal ways. A place between worlds, Hannah murmured, hope stirring in her chest. Dakota nodded. Not perfect. Some whites still fear or hate Shawnee. Some Shawnee remember too well white men's broken promises, but a possible place for a new beginning. As dusk approached, they crested a hill overlooking a broad valley. Below, alongside a swift-flowing river, stood the northern Shawnee camp, 24 wigwams arranged in a circular pattern, surrounded by corrals for horses and areas for crop cultivation. Smoke rose from cooking fires and children played, near the river's edge, under watchful adult eyes. What surprised Hannah most was the sight of several log cabins built at the camp's perimeter, structures that blended white settlers' building techniques with Shawnee practical adaptations. In the fading light, she could see figures moving between the tribal dwellings and these cabins, suggesting an integration she had never imagined possible. Their arrival caused immediate excitement. Children ran to meet them, adults emerged from wigwams, and dogs barked in chaotic greeting. A tall, broad-shouldered man with graying temples approached Dakota first, clasping his arms in warm welcome before turning curious eyes toward Hannah. And Elizabeth, my uncle Keme, Dakota introduced him. He speaks some English. Keme studied Hannah with frank assessment. Dakota's message said you fell from the wagon train. Husband left you to die. Hannah nodded, self-consciously adjusting Elizabeth's blanket. Yes, your nephew saved both our lives. The older man's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes held a spark of approval. Dakota has good heart, sometimes too good. He glanced at his nephew, like his mother. Before further conversation could develop, a newcomer pushed through the gathering crowd, a white man in his 40s, with a sun-browned face partially hidden beneath a thick beard streaked with grey. He wore buckskins, like the Shawnee men, but his bearing and features clearly marked his different heritage. Jackson Caldwell, he introduced himself, his voice carrying the rough cadence of the frontier, but tempered with unexpected gentleness as he noted Elizabeth in Hannah's arms. My wife Aponi is Keme's daughter. We heard Dakota was bringing a white woman and child. His eyes held frank curiosity. Got quite a story to tell, I expect. That night, after being settled in a small wigwam near Naukaz, Hannah shared her full story with Caldwell and his wife Aponi, a striking woman with intelligent eyes who seemed to assess Hannah's every word and gesture. As the tale unfolded, from the wagon train journey to Thomas's betrayal, Dakota's rescue, and the confrontation with the soldiers, Caldwell's expression darkened. Your husband's a piece of work, he commented grimly when she finished, using your capture as an excuse to push for action against the Shawnee. It's an old pattern. Claim Indian atrocities, use it to justify taking their land. Will they come here? Hannah asked, fear clutching at her heart. Thomas and the soldiers. Caldwell exchanged a glance with his wife before answering. Possibly. These hills are becoming valuable. Rumors of gold in the streams, good timber, prime hunting. The government's been pressing tribes to cede more territory. He stroked his beard thoughtfully. But we've built something different here. Whites and Shawnee living together, trading, intermarrying, makes us stronger, harder to dismiss. Aponi spoke for the first time, her English accented but clear. Your husband, he saw you fall. Saw where? Hannah considered this. The ravine was deep, rocky. From above, he would have seen me fall, but not where I landed. In truth, I'm not sure how I survived. So he cannot be certain you died, a pony pointed out. Only that you disappeared. The implication hung in the air between them. Thomas believed she was either dead or captured, but he couldn't be certain which. If he learned she was alive and living willingly among the Shawnee, his carefully constructed narrative would crumble. "You'll be safe here for now," Caldwell assured her, rising to leave. "Rest, heal. We'll figure out what comes next when you're stronger." Over the following weeks, Hannah gradually integrated into the rhythms of the mixed community. While many of the northern Shawnee regarded her with initial suspicion, Kemi's acceptance and Takoda's evident protection granted her a measure of tolerance that slowly warmed to cautious welcome. Elizabeth became an unexpected bridge between Hannah and the tribal women. Fascinated by the fair-haired infant, young mothers would visit bearing gifts: soft-tanned deerskin diapers, tiny moccasins, herbal remedies for colic and rashes. Through these interactions, Hannah began to learn their language more fluently, while they practiced English phrases with increasing confidence. Jackson Caldwell's wife, a pony, became an unexpected ally, teaching Hannah skills necessary for frontier survival: how to preserve food, tan hides, identify medicinal plants, and construct practical garments suited to the wilderness. Though 10 years Hannah's senior, a pony approached her not as a student but as a fellow woman making her way in a challenging world. "I was first Shawnee woman to marry white man in this band," she explained one afternoon as they worked together stretching a deerskin. "Many thought I betrayed my people. Others feared Jackson would take me away, make me forget tribal ways." She smiled slightly. "Instead, he learned our ways, brought useful knowledge from his world. Together, we built something new." "Is that possible for everyone?" Hannah asked, thinking of the divided reactions to her presence. "This blending of worlds?" A pony considered the question seriously. "Not easy, requires open heart, willing mind. Many whites believe they must change Indians, make them the same as whites. Many Indians fear losing what makes them Shawnee, Cheyenne, Delaware." Her dark eyes met Hannah's directly. "The question is, what do you believe?" It was a profound question that Hannah carried with her in the days that followed. What did she believe now? Her former life had been built around certainties that had crumbled. Beneath her, the promise of a faithful husband, the security of a recognized place in society, the protection of shared values and expectations. Here, in this community that existed in the borderlands between two worlds, everything familiar had been stripped away, leaving her to rebuild her understanding from foundation stones. Takoda remained a constant yet distant presence. He had responsibilities within the tribe, hunting, participating in council meetings, training younger warriors, yet Hannah often caught him watching her and Elizabeth from afar. Occasionally, he would bring special provisions, a particularly tender cut of venison, berries gathered from a secret patch, a carved wooden rattle for Elizabeth. These gifts were offered without ceremony and received with quiet gratitude, the connection between them acknowledged but undefined. 6 weeks after their arrival at the northern camp, Hannah sat outside her wigwam in the warm afternoon sun. Elizabeth, sleeping in a cradle board made by the tribal women. Her strength had fully returned, her body healed from childbirth and the arduous journey. She was working on a pair of moccasins, her first solo attempt after a pony's patient instruction. When Jackson Caldwell approached, his expression unusually grave. "Hannah," he greeted her, settling on a log beside her. "Got word from the trading post yesterday. Thought you should know." She set aside her work, instantly alert to his tone. "What is it?" "Wagon train from Illinois came through. Man named Miller. Asking questions about a woman matching your description. Said his wife was friends with you. Feared you might have survived the fall." Hannah's heart leapt. "Sarah Miller, Daniel's wife." Caldwell nodded. Seems they completed the journey to Oregon, but she couldn't rest easy not knowing your fate. Her husband came back east on business, has been asking at every outpost and settlement if anyone's seen you. Tears sprang to Hannah's eyes. Sarah had not forgotten her, had worried about her all these months. "Did you tell him I'm here?" She asked, emotions warring within her, joy at being remembered, fear of being found, uncertainty about what she wanted now. "Told him I'd pass along the message if I heard anything," Caldwell replied carefully. "Thought you should decide what happens next." "Thomas?" Hannah asked, sudden fear clutching at her heart. "Any word of him?" "According to Miller, your husband claimed you were taken by Shawnee raiders. When no ransom demand came, he declared you dead, held a memorial service in Oregon, and—" Caldwell hesitated. "And," Hannah prompted, though she already suspected what was coming, "married Rebecca Hayes 2 months later. They're expecting a child in the spring." The news should have devastated her, Hannah thought, but instead she felt an odd sense of completion, the final severing of ties to her former life. Thomas had moved on so quickly, so callously, that any lingering doubt about her decision to remain with the Shawnee vanished like morning mist. "Miller leaves the trading post tomorrow," Caldwell continued, "heading back to Oregon. If you want to send a word to his wife, or if you want to—" He let the sentence hang unfinished. The choice crystallized before Hannah with unexpected clarity. She could return to white society, not as Thomas Mitchell's wife, but as a widow with a child, dependent on the charity of friends like Sarah. She could reclaim her former identity, the comfortable familiarity of her own culture and traditions, or she could stay in this place between worlds, building something new from the fragments of her old life and the possibilities of this unexpected one. A life where her daughter might grow up understanding both sides of her heritage, where Hannah herself was learning to see with new eyes. As she considered her options, her gaze drifted toward the edge of the camp, where Takoda was returning from a hunting expedition, a deer slung across his shoulders. He paused, seeming to sense her attention, and their eyes met across the distance, a connection that had deepened through shared danger, mutual respect, and unspoken possibility. In that moment, Hannah Mitchell made her decision, one that would shape not only her future and her daughter's, but perhaps, in some small way, the future of two peoples learning to share a changing frontier. "Tell Sarah I'm alive and well," Hannah told Jackson Caldwell the next morning. They stood at the edge of the settlement as the sun crested the eastern hills, painting the valley in gold. "Tell her Elizabeth and I have found a home here, among people who showed us kindness when we needed it most." Caldwell nodded, his weathered face thoughtful. "And if she wants to come find you?" Miller seemed determined to ease his wife's mind. Hannah considered this, watching Elizabeth sleep peacefully in the cradle board strapped to her back. "Tell her she's welcome, but to come without, Thomas knowing. I don't want him or any soldiers following her here." "Wise precaution," Caldwell agreed. "I'll ride to the trading post myself, speak to Miller before he leaves." He studied her face. "You're certain about staying? It's not an easy life here." "On the frontier." Hannah's gaze drifted toward the bustling camp, where Shawnee women prepared morning meals while children played underfoot. Nokau sat outside her wigwam, grinding herbs with a stone mortar, occasionally barking instructions at Kinex. Near the horse corral, Takoda worked with 2 young warriors, demonstrating how to properly fashion a new type of bridle he had designed. "I'm certain," she replied firmly. "This place, these people, they've become my home in ways Springfield never was." Caldwell smiled, revealing a flash of genuine warmth beneath his gruff exterior. "Then I'll help you make it official, if you're amenable. Settlement needs a school teacher. Most whites can't read, and the Shawnee want their children to learn English writing. A pony tells me you've got education." Surprise flickered across Hannah's face. "I taught children in Illinois before I married Thomas, but I never considered—" "Think about it," Caldwell suggested. "Community would provide for you and the little one, give you standing on your own." The offer resonated within Hannah, a chance to contribute, to establish herself not as someone's wife or someone's rescue, but as a valued member of this blended community. She agreed to consider it, watching thoughtfully as Caldwell mounted his horse and rode toward the trading post, carrying her message to the outside world. That evening, as Hannah sat outside her wigwam mending a torn dress, Takoda approached, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. He carried something wrapped in soft deerskin. "Caldwell says you stay," he said, settling beside her on a wooden bench Jackson had crafted. "Yes," Hannah confirmed, setting aside her sewing. "This place feels right for Elizabeth. For me." Takoda nodded, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Good. He hesitated, then continued more firmly. "I have a gift for Elizabeth." He unwrapped the deerskin bundle to reveal an exquisite cradleboard, smaller than the one Hannah currently used. This one was sized perfectly for an infant, carved from pale wood and decorated with intricate symbols burned into its surface. Soft leather straps and a cushion lined with rabbit fur completed the practical yet beautiful creation. "Takoda," Hannah breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's beautiful. Did you make this?" He nodded, a rare smile warming his features. "Shawnee tradition. When a child becomes part of a tribe, receives a cradle board with protection symbols." His finger traced one of the designs. "This is an eagle for clear vision, this turtle for a long life, this wolf for loyalty to family." Hannah blinked back unexpected tears. "You consider Elizabeth part of the tribe?" "She is born of two worlds," Takoda replied solemnly. "Like many here, both belongs to herself." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Hannah Mitchell also belongs, if she wishes." The simple statement contained layers of meaning that Hannah wasn't sure she was ready to unravel. Instead, she placed her hand over his, where it rested on the cradleboard. "Thank you. For this. And for—" Words failed her, inadequate to express. All she owed this man? Takoda turned his hand beneath hers, their palms meeting in a gentle clasp. No thanks needed between family. The word hung between them. Family, neither a declaration nor a question, but a possibility opening before them like a door to an uncharted territory. Before Hannah could respond, a commotion at the edge of the camp drew their attention. Voices rose in alarm, and warriors moved quickly toward the eastern perimeter. Takoda released her hand and stood, instantly alert. "Stay here," he instructed, already moving toward the disturbance. Naturally, Hannah did exactly the opposite. Securing Elizabeth, who had awakened at the noise, she followed at a cautious distance. A small crowd had gathered around a horse and rider, one of the young Shawnee warriors who patrolled the boundaries of their territory. The young man spoke rapidly in Shawnee, his gestures animated and urgent. Even with her limited understanding of the language, Hannah could grasp the gravity of his news from the reactions of those listening, faces hardening, women drawing children closer, men exchanging grim glances. Keme noticed her hovering at the edge of the gathering and motioned her forward. "You should hear this," he said gravely. "What's happened?" Hannah asked, unconsciously holding Elizabeth tighter against her chest. "Patrol spotted soldiers," Takoda explained, his face drawn with concern. 20 men, led by Army captain. They camped 10 miles east near old hunting grounds. Hannah's blood ran cold. "Thomas!" Patrol did not see him, but saw another white man with soldiers. Government man, wearing city clothes. "An Indian agent," Caldwell interjected, having returned from the trading post in time to hear the news. Based on the description, sounds like Peterson from the Territorial Office. He's been pressuring tribes to sign new treaties, cede more land. Why come here with soldiers? Kemi demanded, his weathered face deeply lined with concern. We signed. The last treaty. Gave up eastern valleys already. Caldwell's expression darkened. Word at the trading post is the territorial governor's impatient for more land. Gold prospectors, timbermen, settlers all pushing for access to Shawnee territory. Peterson's likely here to renegotiate with a show of force behind him. Or create an incident to justify taking land, Takoda added grimly. Hannah felt sick. With realization, this is my fault. If Thomas told them I was captured by Shawnee... No, Takoda said firmly. White men always find reason to take Indian land. Your husband provides a convenient story, nothing more. Kemi called the council together immediately, gathering the elders and warriors in the central clearing. Hannah, as the only white woman in the camp, was invited to join, a mark of how her status had evolved in the weeks since her arrival. The council's discussion was heated. Some advocated for immediate relocation deeper into the mountains, abandoning the settlement before the soldiers arrived. Others argued for standing firm on their treaty rights, refusing to be intimidated into further concessions. We cannot keep running, Takoda insisted, his voice carrying authority despite his relative youth. Each time we retreat, they push the boundary farther. Soon no land left for Shawnee. And if we stay and fight, an elder woman challenged. Soldiers have rifles, cannons perhaps. Our children die for pride. Not fight, Takoda clarified. Stand together, Shawnee and white settlers who live with us. Show Peterson we are not separate peoples to divide, but one community with shared interests. The debate continued as dusk settled over the camp. Hannah listened intently, struck by the complexity of the tribe's predicament. These were not the simplistic savages of frontier tales, but a people navigating impossible circumstances with intelligence and wisdom. Eventually, Kemi called for a decision. We stay, he declared, looking to each council member for confirmation. We meet soldiers and government man as a united people. Show strength in peace, not war. As the council dispersed, Caldwell approached Hannah, his expression grave. There's something you should know. I spoke with Miller at the trading post. Thomas Mitchell isn't just spreading tales of your capture. He's been appointed special advisor to the territorial governor on the Indian problem. He's using your story to build a career. Hannah felt as though she'd been struck. He's with the government men? Not with this group, according to Miller, but he's in Oregon City, bending important ears. If Peterson discovers you're here, living willingly among the Shawnee, it undermines Thomas's entire narrative, Hannah finished, understanding dawning, and threatens his position. Caldwell nodded grimly. You might want to consider staying out of sight when these officials arrive. The suggestion, though practical, struck Hannah as fundamentally wrong. She had hidden long enough, first as Thomas's increasingly neglected wife, then as a frightened survivor in the wilderness. The thought of concealing herself now, when her very existence could protect these people who had become her family, was intolerable. No, she said firmly, I won't hide. The soldiers arrived the following day at noon, the sun high overhead, eliminating shadows that might conceal intentions or expressions. Captain James Harrington led the column, a West Point graduate with rigid posture and calculating eyes beneath. His wide-brimmed hat. Beside him rode Gregory Peterson, the Indian agent, a thin, dyspeptic man whose expensive Eastern clothes seemed ill-suited to frontier travel. The Shawnee received them with careful dignity. Kemi, as principal chief, stood at the center of the greeting party, flanked by tribal elders, respected warriors, and, deliberately, the white settlers who had integrated into the community. Jackson Caldwell stood prominently among them, his Status as a successful trader lending weight to the reception, Hannah remained slightly apart, Elizabeth secured in her new cradleboard. She had debated her appearance carefully that morning, ultimately choosing to wear a dress that blended elements of both cultures. The cut was traditional American, but the decorative beadwork and fringe were distinctly Shawnee. Her hair, grown longer during her months with the tribe, was partially braided in the style a pony had taught her. Captain Harrington's gaze swept over the assembled community, his expression betraying nothing. Peterson, however, made little effort to conceal his distaste as he surveyed the mixed settlement. "Chief Keme," Peterson began after dismounting, dispensing with traditional Shawnee greetings in favor of brisk efficiency. "I bring a message from the territorial governor. Recent developments require adjustments to our previous agreement." "We honor treaty signed 2 summers past," Keme replied evenly. "Shawnee keep our word." Peterson's mouth tightened. "Circumstances change. Gold has been discovered in streams within your territory. Settlers require access. The governor proposes a new reservation boundary, 15 miles west of present location." A murmur ran through the gathered tribe. The implications were clear. They were being asked to abandon their established settlement, their cultivated fields, their sacred sites, and retreat yet again before the advancing tide of white expansion. "This land was recognized as Shawnee by a signed treaty," Keme stated, his dignity unwavering despite the outrageous demand. "We have paper with the governor's mark. We have witnesses." "I'm afraid reports of hostile activity have invalidated that agreement," Peterson countered smoothly. "We have documented cases of harassment against settlers, theft of livestock, and at least 1 abduction of a white woman from a wagon train bound for Oregon." This was the moment Hannah had anticipated. She stepped forward, Elizabeth secure against her chest, and spoke clearly enough for all to hear. "I am that woman, Mr. Peterson, Hannah Mitchell, and I was not abducted. I was rescued after being left for dead." Peterson's head snapped toward her, his eyes widening in shock. Captain Harrington studied her with newfound interest, his professional composure momentarily slipping. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Peterson recovered quickly. "Your husband reported you were taken by Shawnee raiders. He's been instrumental in advising the territorial office on response to Indian aggression." "My husband," Hannah replied steadily, "abandoned me after I fell from our wagon on a mountain pass. He left me to die because I had become inconvenient to his ambitions. It was Takoda of the Shawnee who found me, treated my injuries, and helped deliver my daughter when her time came early." She moved closer, conscious of all eyes upon her, the soldiers, the tribal members, the mixed-blood children peering curiously from behind their mothers' skirts. "I live here by choice, Mr. Peterson, as do many others who have found that cooperation serves both peoples better than conflict. There has been no abduction, no aggression. The only hostility comes from those who would use fear to justify taking what isn't theirs." Peterson's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. You've clearly been coerced or—" His gaze flicked to Elizabeth, then to Takoda, who stood nearby. "Or compromised in other ways." The insinuation hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Hannah felt a surge of indignation so powerful it nearly took her breath. "My daughter's father is the man who abandoned us both," she stated, her voice tight with controlled fury. "And while he now enjoys the life he built on lies about my fate, I have found honesty, respect, and community here that I never knew in white society." Captain Harrington, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Mrs. Mitchell, would you be willing to provide a sworn statement regarding your experiences? The accusation of Shawnee abduction was a significant factor in the governor's decision to revisit treaty boundaries." Peterson began to protest, but Harrington silenced him with a sharp glance. The captain, Hannah realized, was not necessarily an ally, but he was a man who preferred facts to convenient fictions. "I would be happy to provide such a statement," she agreed. "And I believe others here could attest to similar experiences of cooperation rather than conflict." What followed was unprecedented in frontier diplomacy. Hannah's testimony, delivered clearly and without embellishment, was recorded by Captain Harrington's adjutant. Jackson Caldwell then presented documentation of the trading relationships established between the settlement and white communities. Ohlone and other mixed heritage residents spoke of their experiences bridging both worlds. By day's end, Peterson's mission of intimidation had transformed into an impromptu hearing on the actual conditions of the frontier, conditions that contradicted the convenient narratives being crafted in territorial offices by men like Thomas Mitchell. Captain Harrington, revealing himself as a man of unexpected principle, finally addressed Peterson as the sun began to set. "I believe we've gathered sufficient evidence to warrant reconsideration of the governor's directive," he stated formally. "My report will recommend maintaining the current treaty boundaries pending further investigation into these allegations of manufactured hostilities." Peterson sputtered with indignation. "Captain, the governor ordered me to assess the situation and act accordingly," Harrington interrupted. "I find no evidence of Shawnee aggression here. Quite the contrary." His gaze moved briefly to Hannah. "And I find substantial evidence that we have been misinformed by certain advisors." The implications were clear. Thomas Mitchell's carefully constructed narrative and his nascent political career would crumble under scrutiny. The soldiers established camp at a respectful distance from the settlement, planning to depart the following morning. Peterson, thoroughly discomfited by the turn of events, retreated to the officer's tent, refusing further engagement with either the Shawnee or the white residents of the community. That evening, as celebrations broke out across the settlement, not of victory, which all recognized as temporary at best, but of unity in the face of threat, Hannah found herself seeking solitude by the river. The day's events had drained her emotionally, bringing her past and present into sharp collision. "You were brave today." Hannah turned to find Takoda approaching, his expression thoughtful in the deepening twilight. "Not brave," she countered. "Just tired of lies." He settled beside her on a flat rock overlooking the water. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the current flow over smooth stones. "What happens now?" Takoda finally asked. "Your husband will learn. You live that you spoke against him." Hannah had been considering this very question throughout the afternoon. "Thomas will likely deny everything," she predicted. "Claim I've been brainwashed, or that the woman who spoke wasn't truly his wife. He's built too much on this story to abandon it easily." "Dangerous man," Takoda observed. "Wounded pride makes men foolish." "Yes," Hannah agreed softly. "I wonder sometimes how I never saw it before, how I convinced myself his ambition was vision, his selfishness was strength." "Love blinds," Takoda said simply. "Sometimes good way, sometimes bad." The word love hung between them, laden with unspoken questions. Hannah turned to study his profile. The strong line of his jaw, the quiet dignity in his bearing, the eyes that saw so much yet revealed so little of his inner thoughts. "Takoda," she began hesitantly, "when you found me in that ravine, why did you stop? Most men, white or Shawnee, would have continued on their way." He considered her question carefully before answering. "I saw strength," he said finally. "Broken, arm cut head, big with child, but still fighting to live. Spirit like that deserves a chance." His simple assessment moved her deeply. Not pity, not obligation, but recognition of her will to survive had prompted his initial aid. And now, she prompted gently. "Why do you continue to help us?" Takoda turned to face her fully, the evening's last light catching the warmth in his eyes. Now I see more than strength, see a woman who learns Shawnee ways, but keeps best of her own, who stands before soldiers to protect people not born to, who teaches both worlds to her daughter. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. See, woman I would walk beside, if she wishes the same path. The declaration, for all its simplicity, contained depths that took Hannah's breath away. This was not a hasty passion like Thomas's courtship had been, full of grand promises and sweeping gestures. This was something quieter and infinitely more substantial, a recognition of shared values, mutual respect, and the possibility of building something enduring together. I don't know if it will be easy, she said honestly. There will always be people like Peterson, like Thomas, who see our two worlds as incompatible. Not easy, Dakota agreed, but possible, like teaching children both languages. Hard work, good result. Hannah smiled at the comparison. Caldwell offered me a position as teacher for the settlement, she told him, for both Shawnee and White, children, to teach reading, writing, numbers. Good match for your skills, Dakota nodded approvingly. Children need a bridge between worlds, like Elizabeth will be. At the mention of her daughter, Hannah glanced toward the settlement, where Elizabeth was being watched over by Kinnex. I want her to be proud of both sides of her heritage, she said softly, not torn between them. She will be, Dakota assured her, because Mother shows the way. The confidence in his voice warmed something deep within Hannah. A place that had been cold since that terrible day on the mountain pass, when she had fallen not just from a wagon, but from the future she had planned. In its place, something new had taken root, unexpected, challenging, but vibrant with possibility. I would like to walk the same path, she said finally, her hand finding his in the gathering darkness. If you're certain it's what you want. Dakota's, fingers entwined with hers, strong and sure. More certain than sunrise, he said simply. As they sat together by the river, the sounds of celebration drifted from the settlement, drums and singing, laughter and conversation in two languages, blending into one community's voice. It was not, Hannah reflected, the life she had imagined when she'd left Illinois nearly a year ago. It was something altogether more difficult, more precious, and more true. The frontier that had nearly claimed her life had instead given her a new one, not as Thomas Mitchell's wife bound for Oregon, but as Hannah Mitchell of the mixed Shawnee settlement, mother to Elizabeth, teacher to children of two worlds, and partner to a man who saw strength where others had seen only burden. The path ahead would not be easy. Thomas's influence still threatened from afar. The territorial government's appetite for land remained undiminished, and the inexorable tide of westward expansion continued. But tonight, with Dakota beside her and Elizabeth safe among people who had become family, Hannah faced the uncertain future with something she had lost and found again on her journey: hope. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed her desperate prayers in a rocky ravine months before. They had answered, Hannah thought, just not in any way she could have imagined. And perhaps that was the truest form of frontier wisdom, learning to recognize salvation when it arrived in unexpected forms, and courage when it grew from the ashes of abandoned certainties. We should return, Dakota said eventually, rising and offering his hand. Tomorrow brings new challenges and new possibilities, Hannah added, accepting his help and standing beside him, equal partners facing the future together. Hand in hand, they walked back toward the lights of the settlement. Not the end of their story, but the beginning of a new chapter in a narrative still unfolding across the changing American frontier. Winter descended upon the Shawnee settlement with an unexpected ferocity that year. By mid-November, snow already carpeted the valley, transforming the landscape into a pristine expanse that glittered beneath the pale sun. Game grew scarce, forcing hunting parties to venture farther afield. The community turned inward, focusing on preserving food stores, crafting winter clothing, and maintaining the carefully cultivated harmony between its diverse members. For Hannah, the winter brought both challenges and joys. Her small schoolhouse, a modest log structure Caldwell and Dakota had helped her build at the edge of the settlement, became not just a place of learning, but a central gathering spot, where children of both cultures huddled around the stone fireplace, absorbing knowledge, along with much-needed warmth. Letters first, Hannah instructed one snowy morning, her breath visible in the cold air despite the fire's efforts. 10 children between the ages of 4 and 12 sat in a semicircle before her, their expressions ranging from rapt attention to barely concealed impatience. Then stories, then mathematics. "Why must we learn white man's numbers?" asked 8-year-old Mequan, a bright boy with a perpetual furrow between his brows whenever Hannah presented new concepts. "Shawnee count differently," Hannah smiled, appreciating his challenging spirit, "because traders use these numbers. If you know both ways, you'll never be cheated." This practical application satisfied Mequan, as it usually did. Hannah had quickly learned that abstract justifications for education fell flat with Shawnee children. They respected knowledge with demonstrable value, a perspective she found increasingly reasonable as her own understanding of survival in this harsh environment deepened. Elizabeth, now 6 months old, watched the lessons from her cradleboard propped against Hannah's desk. She had grown into a remarkably good-natured baby, with Hannah's fair coloring but a watchful intensity reminiscent of Dakota. The tribal children doted on her, bringing her small treasures and singing Shawnee lullabies when she fussed. At midday, as Hannah dismissed the children for their meal break, Nalco appeared at the schoolhouse door, her aged face grave beneath her wolf fur hood. "Riders coming," she announced without preamble. "From the east, not soldiers this time, different." Hannah secured Elizabeth to her back and followed Nalco outside. Despite the bitter cold, most of the settlement had gathered in the central clearing, gazing eastward where 3 figures on horseback approached through the snow. Even at a distance, Hannah could tell they weren't military. Their riding was less regimented, their outlines less uniform. Dakota materialized at her side, a rifle held casually but ready in his gloved hands. Since the confrontation with Peterson and Captain Harrington 3 months earlier, the tribe had maintained heightened vigilance. The captain's report had temporarily forestalled further government action, but everyone understood this reprieve was tenuous at best. "Traders," Hannah suggested, squinting against the snow's glare. Dakota shook his head. "Too few, and the wrong season." As the riders drew closer, Jackson Caldwell moved to the forefront of the welcoming committee, his hand resting on his own holstered pistol. Kemi flanked him, bow in hand, his weathered face impassive. The lead rider raised a hand in greeting as they approached, a universally understood gesture of peaceful intent. They reined in their horses at a respectful distance, and the leader removed his snow-crusted hat, revealing a shock of graying red hair. "Hello, the camp," he called. "Daniel Miller seeking passage and brief shelter." Hannah's heart stuttered in her chest. Daniel Miller, Sarah's husband. Behind him rode 2 other men Hannah didn't recognize, their expressions wary but not overtly hostile. "Miller," Caldwell acknowledged, stepping forward. "Been some months since the trading post. What brings you this far into Shawnee territory?" "Miller's." I scanned the assembled crowd until they found Hannah standing beside Dakota, Elizabeth secured to her back. Relief washed over his weather-beaten face. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "Sarah will be mighty relieved. She wouldn't rest until I promised to find you myself before spring thaw." Caldwell glanced toward Hannah, silently deferring to her judgment. These were connections to her past life, potentially welcome potentially disruptive. Mr. Miller is known to me, Hannah confirmed, moving forward. He and his wife Sarah were friends on the wagon train journey. She was kind to me when others weren't. This vouching satisfied the immediate security concerns. Keme gestured toward the council lodge, the largest structure in the settlement, indicating the visitors should dismount and enter for proper discussion. Young men appeared to take charge of the horses, leading them toward sheltered corrals. Inside the council lodge, a substantial fire burned in the central pit, providing welcome warmth after the bitter cold outside. Hannah settled near the fire, unbinding Elizabeth from the cradleboard and cradling her in her arms instead. Dakota sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. Across the fire, Daniel Miller and his companions, introduced as James Woodson, and Peter Callahan, both Oregon settlers, accepted cups of hot pine needle tea from Kinex. Sarah insisted I find you, Miller explained once preliminaries were observed. After I returned from the trading post with news you were alive but choosing to remain with the Shawnee, she was part relieved, part determined to see for herself. He sipped the tea, grimacing slightly at its unfamiliar taste. Would have come herself, if not for the children and the winter journey. It's good to hear she's well, Hannah said sincerely. And the children? Emma and Joshua? Miller nodded, a smile softening his careworn face. Thriving in Oregon, we've established a good homestead in the Willamette Valley. Sarah's expecting our third come spring. A pang of bittersweet nostalgia touched Hannah. That might have been her life. The life Thomas had promised when they joined the wagon train. Yet, as she glanced at Dakota beside her and Elizabeth in her arms, she felt no regret for the path she'd chosen instead. I'm glad, she said. But surely you didn't brave a winter crossing of the mountains just to deliver this news. Miller exchanged glances with his companions, his expression growing serious. Not just that, no. There's trouble brewing back east you should know about. Thomas Mitchell has been busy. Hannah tensed, instinctively holding Elizabeth closer. What kind of trouble? He's become influential in territorial politics, Miller explained. Uses your tragic story to advocate for aggressive action against tribes throughout the region. Claims you were abducted, tortured, likely killed by Shawnee raiders. But Captain Harrington's report, Hannah began. Buried, interrupted Woodson, speaking for the first time. A former lawyer from Boston, according to his brief introduction, he had the precise diction and measured cadence of an educated Easterner. Never reached proper channels in Washington. Peterson saw to that. How? Caldwell demanded, leaning forward with alarm evident in his posture. Intercepted dispatches, most likely, Woodson replied. Harrington was reassigned to a remote post in California Territory shortly after filing his report. Convenient timing. Keme's expression darkened. So white government never hears the truth about settlement, about Hannah Mitchell being here. By choice. Worse than that, Miller continued grimly. Thomas has partnered with investors interested in the rumored gold deposits in this region. They're pressuring the governor to authorize a punitive expedition against hostile Shawnee bands in this very area. The implications landed like a physical blow. Thomas wasn't just denying Hannah's survival, he was actively working to destroy the community that had taken her in, potentially including her and Elizabeth, to protect his political position and financial interests. When? Dakota asked, his voice steady despite the grave news. Spring, Miller answered, as soon as the mountain pass is clear. They're gathering volunteers now, offering land grants in pacified territory as compensation. A heavy silence fell over the council lodge. Hannah's mind raced, calculating timelines, considering options. By spring, Elizabeth would be approaching, her first birthday. The settlement would be vulnerable after winter's depletions, even with Caldwell's connections at the trading post and the handful of supportive white settlers. They couldn't hope to withstand a government-sanctioned military. Action. There's more, Miller added reluctantly. Thomas has remarried, as you know. His new wife, Rebecca, lost the baby she was carrying. They're claiming now that you took their infant when you fled, that the child you have is actually Rebecca's. Stolen by you and your Shawnee conspirators? Hannah gasped, instinctively clutching Elizabeth tighter. That's insane. Elizabeth was born after I fell from the wagon. Rebecca wasn't even pregnant then. She was using my condition to curry favor with Thomas. Truth matters little in this narrative, Woodson observed dryly. It's a compelling story for settlers already inclined to fear natives. A white woman kidnapped, a white baby stolen. Powerful motivation for volunteers. Hannah looked down at Elizabeth, peacefully sleeping in her arms, blissfully unaware of the dark forces gathering against her very existence. The idea that Thomas, who had abandoned them both, would now claim her daughter as his legitimate child with Rebecca was so twisted, so callously calculated, that it left her breathless with fury. "What do we do?" she asked, looking to Dakota, to Keme, to Caldwell, the leaders who had guided this community through previous threats. "We could relocate again," Kinnock suggested hesitantly, "move deeper into mountains where soldiers cannot easily follow." Gem shook his head. "Already moved 3 times in my lifetime. Each new place is smaller, harder. Game grows scarce, winter's harsh. Children and elders suffer most." "Fight," suggested one of the younger warriors, his hand instinctively moving. "To his knife hilt. Against territorial militia with government backing," Caldwell countered. "That's suicide, son. And exactly what Thomas Mitchell wants. Justification for seizing all Shawnee lands." Dakota, who had remained thoughtful throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Not move, not fight." His dark eyes met Hannah's with calm certainty. "We expose. Lie at its source." "What do you mean?" Hannah asked. "Thomas Mitchell builds power on story of your death or capture, on claim that Elizabeth is stolen child." Dakota's gaze swept the assembled council. "We bring Hannah Mitchell to Oregon Territory. Show she lives free, by choice. Show Elizabeth is her natural child, born after she was abandoned." The boldness of the suggestion momentarily stunned the council into silence. It was Woodson who recovered first, his legal mind immediately assessing the strategy. It could work, he acknowledged. Mitchell's entire narrative collapses if Hannah appears publicly, especially with witnesses who can testify to the timeline of events. His political allies would distance themselves quickly. No one wants association with such a blatant fabrication. "And the gold interests," Caldwell pressed. "They'll still want these lands. Without Mitchell's convenient story, they'd need another pretext," Woodson replied. "Harder to manufacture with Hannah alive and well, contradicting the abduction narrative." Hannah's thoughts whirled. Return to Oregon, to white society after all these months, face Thomas, Rebecca, the very people who had abandoned her. The prospect was terrifying, yet the alternative was worse. Waiting for spring and the arrival of armed men intent on destroying everything and everyone she now held dear. "I'll go," she declared firmly. "Elizabeth and I will confront Thomas directly, in public, where he cannot hide from the truth." Dakota's hand found hers, warm and steady. "Not alone," he said simply. "No," she agreed, twining her fingers with his. "Not alone." The plan took shape rapidly over the following hours. Daniel Miller and his companions would return to Oregon with Hannah, Elizabeth, and Dakota. Woodson, with his legal background, would arrange a public forum, perhaps at the Territorial Assembly or a town meeting, where Hannah could present her case directly to influential citizens. Caldwell offered to contact sympathetic traders who operated between territories, ensuring word of Hannah's survival and imminent testimony spread widely enough that Thomas couldn't easily suppress it. "Journey will be dangerous," Kim warned, as discussions concluded. "Winter mountains claim many lives." "We follow the southern route," Miller assured him, "longer but safer this time of year. We'll reach Oregon City by late February if the weather holds." That night, after decisions were finalized and preparations begun, Hannah stood outside her small cabin, gazing up at stars partially obscured by drifting clouds. Elizabeth slept inside, watched over by Kinex, while Hannah sought a moment alone to process the day's revelations. The cold air stung her lungs as she breathed deeply, trying to calm the anxiety churning within her. She had come so far from the naive young woman who had left Illinois with Thomas, had endured abandonment, near death, childbirth in the wilderness, and the complete reconstruction of her identity among people she once would have feared. Now, this hard-won peace was threatened not by impersonal forces, but by deliberate malice from the man who had once promised to love and protect her. "Cannot sleep?" Dakota's voice came softly from behind her. Hannah turned, unsurprised by his quiet approach. Too much to think about. He moved to stand beside her, his shoulder barely touching hers, a subtle reminder of his presence without demanding her attention. They had developed this comfortable understanding over months together, learning when to speak and when silence served better. "Afraid to face my husband?" Dakota asked eventually, his tone free of judgment. Hannah considered the question seriously. "Not afraid of Thomas himself," she replied slowly. "Afraid of returning to that world. Of being seen as I was before, just someone's wife, someone's mother, defined by my relationships rather than myself." Dakota nodded, understanding. "You are more now. Teacher, survivor, bridge between peoples. These things do not disappear in Oregon. Some people won't see beyond that poor Mrs. Mitchell or the woman who lived with savages," Hannah said, voicing fears she'd been reluctant to acknowledge even to herself. "Some people have small vision," Dakota agreed. "Matter only. If you let their eyes become yours." The simple wisdom of his statement struck Hannah profoundly. She had spent much of her early life viewing herself through others' expectations, her parents', then Thomas's. It was only in the wilderness, stripped of those external definitions, that she had begun to see herself clearly. "There's something else," she admitted, turning to face him fully. "I'm afraid of what this journey might mean for us, for you. Oregon society isn't kind to—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "To a Shawnee man who loves white woman?" Dakota finished for her, the directness of his statement momentarily stealing her breath. It was the first time either had spoken of love explicitly, though their actions had expressed it in 100 small ways over the past months. Hannah felt a flush rise to her cheeks despite the cold. "Yes," she whispered, "they'll be cruel. They won't understand." Dakota considered this, his expression thoughtful rather than wounded. "In Shawnee teaching, eagle and deer do not share nest. Different creatures, different paths." A small smile touched his lips, "but human hearts do not follow simple rules. Naukau says, Creator enjoys surprising us." He took her cold hands between his warm ones, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I go to Oregon, not just for settlement safety, not just for Elizabeth. I go for you, Hannah Mitchell, whether Oregon understands or not." The simple declaration, spoken beneath the winter stars, cemented something that had been growing between them since that first encounter in the ravine. Whatever came next, the dangerous journey, the confrontation with Thomas, the uncertain future, they would face it together, defying the conventional boundaries that separated their worlds. "We should sleep," Hannah said finally, though she made no move to withdraw her hands from his. "Long preparations tomorrow." Dakota nodded, reluctantly releasing her hands but maintaining her gaze for a moment longer. "Dream of spring," he suggested, "when truth blooms like flowers after snow." The journey began 3 days later with little ceremony but much private emotion. The settlement gathered to bid farewell to their departing members, Hannah, Elizabeth, Dakota, and Kinex, who had insisted on accompanying them to help care for Elizabeth during the difficult travel. Miller and his companions had replenished their supplies and rested their horses, ready for the southern route that would take them on a wide arc through less treacherous mountain passes. Naukar presented Hannah with a small leather pouch containing special herbs. For fever, for strength, she instructed. 3 pinches in hot water if sickness comes. Her weathered hand touched Elizabeth's cheek briefly. Child is strong like a mother. Will survive the journey. Kem's goodbye was more formal, though Hannah had come to recognize the depth of feeling beneath his stoic exterior. You speak for our people in Oregon, he told her. Show them the Shawnee way is honorable, even when others are not. Hannah promised she would overcome with gratitude for this community that had accepted her when she had nothing to offer but her broken body and unborn child. The small caravan departed as dawn broke, following game trails that would eventually connect with the more established southern route. Hannah rode a gentle mare provided by the tribe, Elizabeth secured to her chest in a modified cradle board designed for travel. Takoda rode slightly ahead, his keen eyes constantly scanning the terrain for hazards or signs of other travelers. They crested the first ridge. Hannah turned for a final glimpse of the settlement, smoke rising from morning fires, children already at play despite the cold, life continuing in the rhythm they had established together. A lump formed in her throat at the thought that she might never see it again. We return when the task is done, Takoda assured her, reading her thoughts as he often seemed to do. Hannah nodded, forcing herself to face forward again, toward the uncertain future that awaited them in Oregon. Elizabeth stirred against her chest, and Hannah placed a protective hand over her daughter's small form. Yes, she agreed, finding strength in the certainty of her purpose. We will return. The winter landscape stretched before them, vast and challenging, but no longer alien, or threatening as it had once seemed to Hannah. She had learned its rhythms, its dangers, and its gifts. She had found her place within it, between worlds that others thought incompatible. Now she would carry that hard-won wisdom back into the society that had once defined her, not as a supplicant seeking readmission, but as a woman transformed by her journey, ready to confront the lies that threatened those she loved and to claim the truth of her chosen path. Behind them, the settlement grew smaller with distance. Ahead lay mountain passes, frozen rivers, and eventually the confrontation that would determine not just Hannah and Elizabeth's future, but the fate of an entire community balanced precariously between 2 colliding worlds on the American frontier. The Oregon City Courthouse stood imposing against the gray February sky, its wooden columns and broad steps designed to impress upon visitors the solemnity of territorial justice. Hannah paused at the bottom of those steps, adjusting Elizabeth on her hip while gazing up at the building where her future and the future of the Shawnee settlement would be decided. "Ready?" Sarah Miller asked gently, standing beside her. Their reunion 3 days earlier had been tearful and joyous, Sarah embracing Hannah with such fierce affection that it momentarily banished the anxiety of returning to white society. Hannah nodded, drawing strength from the presence of her allies. Takoda stood slightly apart, dressed in a curious blend of Shawnee and settler clothing, buckskin pants and vest over a white cotton shirt Caldwell had insisted he wear for this crucial appearance. The outfit did nothing to diminish his dignity, but offered a visual compromise intended to make him less alien to the assembled townspeople. "Remember," Woodson instructed quietly as they mounted the steps, "speak clearly, directly. Address the territorial commissioner, not Thomas. Focus on facts. When you fell, when Elizabeth was born, Takoda's rescue. Emotional appeals won't sway. Commissioner Bradford, as effectively as precise details." The journey from the Shawnee settlement had been arduous, but mercifully free of major disaster. They had reached Oregon City a week earlier than anticipated, giving Woodson precious additional days to arrange this hearing before the Territorial Commissioner, a formal inquiry into conflicting reports regarding tribal activities along the eastern boundary. Inside, the courthouse was packed with curious citizens, territorial officials, and newspaper reporters. Daniel Miller had spread word of Hannah's survival strategically, ensuring that Thomas could not prevent the hearing without raising suspicions. At the front of the room, Commissioner Jonathan Bradford, a stern-faced man with spectacles and thinning grey hair, presided from an elevated desk. And there, seated at a table to the right of the commissioner's bench, was Thomas Mitchell, Hannah's first glimpse of her husband after nearly a year sent a complex wave of emotions crashing through her. He looked prosperous, dressed in a fine suit, his beard neatly trimmed, his posture confident. Beside him sat Rebecca, wearing an expression of practiced grief that occasionally slipped into something harder when she thought no one was watching. Thomas's eyes widened with unmistakable shock when Hannah entered with Elizabeth in her arms. The colour drained from his face before he regained his composure, leaning to whisper urgently to a well-dressed man beside him. His lawyer, presumably. "The Territorial Commission calls Hannah Mitchell to provide testimony," announced the clerk. Taking a deep breath, Hannah handed Elizabeth to Sarah and walked forward. She felt rather than saw Takoda's supportive gaze following her to the witness chair. As she was sworn in, she caught Thomas's eye briefly. The man who had once been the center of her world now appeared as a stranger, handsome still, but with a coldness she had been blind to before. "Mrs. Mitchell," Commissioner Bradford began, "your appearance here is unexpected. Your husband has reported you kidnapped by Shawnee raiders last June during your wagon train journey to Oregon Territory." "That is false, Commissioner," Hannah stated clearly, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom. "I was not kidnapped, I was abandoned." For the next hour, Hannah recounted her story in meticulous detail. The deterioration of her marriage during the journey west, overhearing Thomas's plan to leave her behind, the accident on the mountain pass, and Thomas's decision to continue, without searching for her. She described her injuries, Takoda's discovery and treatment of her, Elizabeth's birth, and the community that had taken them in. Elizabeth was born in the Shawnee camp, with their medicine woman attending, Hannah explained, her gaze steady despite the whispers rippling through the crowd. "She was born approximately 3 weeks after my fall from the wagon, a fall witnessed by multiple members of the wagon train who believed I could not have survived." "This is absurd," Thomas finally burst out, unable to contain himself further. "She's clearly been brainwashed by these savages, and that child," he pointed dramatically toward Elizabeth in Sarah's arms, "that child is mine and Rebecca's, stolen when Hannah joined with the Shawnee." Commissioner Bradford peered over his spectacles. "Mr. Mitchell, you'll have your opportunity to speak. For now, Mrs. Mitchell has the floor." "Commissioner, I have witnesses who can confirm my account," Hannah continued calmly. "Sarah Miller was with me on the wagon train and knew of my pregnancy. She can confirm Elizabeth's parentage is exactly as I have stated." Sarah nodded firmly from her seat. "Furthermore," Hannah added, "I believe Captain James Harrington of the Territorial Militia filed a report last fall, confirming my presence in the Shawnee settlement, my account of what happened, and the fact that I was there by choice with my infant daughter." At this, a stir of interest passed through the officials seated near the commissioner. Bradford leafed through some papers before him. "We have no such report in our files, Mrs. Mitchell," he stated. "That is because it was intercepted and suppressed, sir," came a new voice from the back of the courtroom. Heads turned as Captain Harrington himself strode forward in full uniform, removing his hat as he approached the commissioner's bench. "Captain Harrington," Bradford acknowledged with surprise. "You're supposed to be stationed in California Territory." "I requested leave when I learned of this hearing, sir," Harrington replied. I can confirm that I filed a complete report last October regarding the mixed settlement of Shawnee and Whites, including Mrs. Mitchell's presence there. I personally interviewed her and documented that she was living there voluntarily after being rescued by a tribal hunter. Thomas's lawyer rose quickly. This is irregular, Commissioner. Captain Harrington wasn't called as a witness, and I'm very interested in why his report never reached this office, Bradford interrupted. Captain, you'll be given the opportunity to testify fully. The hearing progressed with mounting evidence, supporting Hannah's account. Sarah Miller testified about Hannah's pregnancy during the wagon train journey. Daniel Miller confirmed finding her alive and well in the Shawnee settlement months after her supposed abduction. Finally, Bradford called Takoda forward. A hush fell over the courtroom as Takoda stood before the commissioner, his bearing proud yet respectful. Some spectators whispered behind their hands, many having never seen a Shawnee person up close before. State your name for the record, the clerk instructed. I am Takoda of the Southern Shawnee, now living with the Northern Band, he replied in clear English. And you claim to have found Mrs. Mitchell after her fall? Not claim. Did find, Takoda corrected. Simply, in the ravine below the mountain trail, broken arm, cut head, big with child, near death. His testimony, delivered with straightforward dignity, described Hannah's rescue, Elizabeth's birth, and the subsequent events without embellishment or defensiveness. When Thomas's lawyer attempted to paint him as a kidnapper or worse, Takoda remained unruffled, answering each accusatory question with the same measured clarity. Why would you help a white woman? The lawyer demanded finally, frustration evident in his tone. Your people have suffered at the hands of settlers pushing into your territories. Takoda considered the question thoughtfully. Shawnee Way teaches that all life has value, woman in need, child coming, does not matter if skin white or brown, helping honors Creator. The simplicity and moral clarity of his answer resonated through the courtroom, causing even some who had entered with prejudice to consider his words. By late afternoon, Commissioner Bradford had heard enough. Thomas's carefully constructed narrative had collapsed under the weight of contrary evidence. His claim that Elizabeth was his child with Rebecca crumbled when Sarah Miller produced the letter Thomas had sent after reaching Oregon, specifically mentioning that Rebecca had lost her baby, dated weeks before he began claiming Elizabeth had been kidnapped. Based on the testimony presented, Bradford announced, I find no evidence of Shawnee hostilities as alleged. Rather, I find troubling evidence of deliberate misrepresentation by Mr. Mitchell regarding his wife's fate and the parentage of her child. He fixed Thomas with a stern gaze. Such false claims against tribal communities could have led to tragic and unjustified military action. The commissioner's final ruling was definitive. Hannah had never been abducted. Elizabeth was indisputably her natural child with Thomas, and the mixed Shawnee settlement posed no threat requiring territorial intervention. Furthermore, he ordered an investigation into the suppression of Captain Harrington's report and Thomas's apparent perjury in official statements. As the courthouse emptied, Hannah stood in the afternoon light with Elizabeth in her arms, a strange sense of peace settling over her. Thomas approached once, his expression a mixture of anger and calculation. This isn't over, Hannah, he muttered. You've ruined everything I've built here. No, Thomas, she replied quietly. You did that yourself when you chose lies over truth. When you abandoned us for your ambitions. Rebecca pulled him away before he could respond, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Hannah watched them go without regret, the last threads binding her to her former life finally severed. That evening, in the Millers' modest home where they had been welcomed as guests, Hannah sat beside Takoda on the porch, watching the sunset over the rooftops of Oregon City. What now? He asked, his hand finding hers in the gathering twilight. Hannah smiled, leaning slightly against his shoulder. Now we go home, back to the settlement, to our people. Our people, Dakota repeated, satisfaction evident in his voice. Good words. Elizabeth slept peacefully inside, unaware of the momentous changes her young life had already witnessed, or of the unique path ahead, bridging two worlds that her mother and Dakota were helping to reconcile through their unlikely bond. As Hannah gazed toward the eastern mountains that separated them from the settlement, she felt not the weariness of the journey still to come, but the certainty that wherever this path led, through wilderness and prejudice, through joy and hardship, they would walk it together, creating something new from the best of both their worlds, and that perhaps was the truest form of frontier courage. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.